All right, so we have been talking a lot recently about Democrats' complete refusal to actually wield the power that they have at their disposal over the course of this entire negotiation process surrounding the bipartisan infrastructure framework and the Build Back Better agenda. But unfortunately for the American people, that is not the only realm in which Democrats are massively failing right now. As I got a good article here from Common Dreams breaking down the current situation surrounding the GOP, the Republican Party, all across the country and multiple states across the country, completely overhauling their election maps and who is going to get to control their election procedures and the completely ridiculous gerrymandered maps that they have been putting forward. So I wanted to break this down for you guys to get a sense of where we are at right now in this pathetic excuse for a democracy that we have left here in the United States. So again, here from Common Dreams, total asymmetric warfare. Georgia GOP redraws political map as U.S. Senate Dems do absolutely nothing. So we're going to be talking about Georgia specifically in this example, but understand this is happening all across the country. So they continue here saying that voting rights advocates within and beyond Georgia ramped up calls for congressional action after the Peach State's Republican lawmakers became the latest to approve a gerrymandered political map intended to give the GOP a political advantage for the next decade. So they say following similar moves by GOP-controlled state legislatures in Ohio and Texas, the Georgia General Assembly sent a new congressional map to the desk of Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who is absolutely batshit insane, and he is expected to sign it into law. And these redistricting efforts have come as right-wingers in the evenly split U.S. Senate block various voting rights bills, and a few Democrats refuse to support killing the filibuster. So listen, in a broader perspective, okay, the excuse for American democracy, okay, has so many problems from the ground level, whether it's like campaign financing and how corporations have basically completely bought and controlled our entire political system, all the way to things like gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, I think, is like the most surface level, stupid and ridiculous example of corruption that we have within the United States political system, because literally what it is, and I think they say this in this piece a couple times, but I mean, literally what gerrymandering is just giving politicians the ability to choose their voters, okay? It's complete nonsense, and basically in every state, or almost a majority of states, they have partisan processes that they go through in order to do this, right? And you see that as an example here in Georgia. Whatever the state legislature is, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, if they don't have an independent commission that is coming up with the maps for these districts to basically try to make it somewhat fair and representative of the overall body of voters or constituents within that demographic, instead of doing that, they just have massively partisan processes where they put in place this ridiculous process where, and I'm going to break it down for you exactly how this works and the types of things that they can actually do. But I mean, they basically just to get to just choose their voters. Okay, so it's a complete reversal of what democracy is actually supposed to be within a functioning democratic political system. It's the exact opposite of what a democracy would be. So again, we have multiple levels of multiple different problems within our political system and this excuse for a democracy. But this is really the most egregious and surface level example that we have. So they continue here saying that the Georgia GOP's map is designed to increase the number of congressional districts the party controls from 8 to 9, leaving Democrats with just 5. And again, remember, this is Georgia. It's a pretty evenly split state. So, you know, with Democrats get 5 and Republicans get 9 now, apparently, that's obviously not evenly split. This is a state that Joe Biden even won. But they say, according to an analysis by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the main paper here in Georgia, though Georgia's voters are split between the two political parties, none of the states, 14 congressional districts would be competitive. Okay, so again, basically, the way that they do this, okay, so just to give you a perspective in terms of how gerrymandering works, this is a good breakdown here that I'll link down below from the Washington Post from a while ago. But basically, like, let's just take in a broader picture, right? In any state, let's just say you have 60% blue and 40% red representation among the actual constituents, right? There are many different ways that you can break this up depending on who is in control of making these gerrymandered maps, right? So they say here, so here's just one example, a perfect representation. Obviously, if you had an actual one-to-one correlation of a representative political body, it would look something like this. So you have perfect representation in a 60% Democrat and 40% red state. You would have something like 3 blue districts and 2 red districts, or something proportionate to that level that they're talking about here. Now, the way that they can do this, they have 2 different strategies. I guess they're called cracking and something else, but they basically say, here's a district, or here's a situation where you could basically have all Democratic districts. So if Democrats happen to control this state, even though they only have 60% of the overall constituency supporting them, there is a way that they could feasibly break up these districts to make it so that you have a certain amount of Democrats within each district and a certain amount of Republican districts, and you can break up Republican districts into different factions, or try to shove a bunch of Republican voters in a district that you know is going to disproportionately have more Democratic voters that could offset those votes. And that's how you would end up with a situation like this. They define it as compact but unfair. But basically, you see here, there is a way to split up this overall, 60% blue, 40% red, to where you have 100% blue districts. There's also a way to where you can take a 40% or a 60% blue and a 40% red constituency and break that up to give red a majority. And that is exactly what Republicans are doing all across the country, because believe it or not, the Republican Party cannot operate unless they are given minority rule in this country, okay? And that is pretty obvious, right? The vast majority of the American people do not support the Republican agenda, and so the only way that they can actually shove through their agenda is with things like the Electoral College or gerrymandering or any number of other corrupt and undemocratic ways that they come to power. They cannot wield the power that they have right now through democratic means. So they're basically their strategy, instead of actually trying to earn the votes of constituents and going about it that way, and, doing something, I don't know, radical, like trying to pass policies that are overwhelmingly supported by the American people. Instead of doing any of that, they basically just stick to their corrupt, trickle-down Reaganomic agenda, hyper-militaristic agenda, and basically go through undemocratic means to try to force their will on the American people, which, again, is extremely unpopular among the American people. That's the reason why Republicans have to rely on minority control of the political system, is because people just fucking hate what the Republican Party actually stands for. But they continue here, basically, so again, that's just an example from Georgia, and that was just a generic example that we had there. But this is not the only situation that we have across the country. And just to give you a perspective on other states, right? So this is from Ohio. So breaking here from Ari Berman, Ohio State Legislature approves extreme gerrymandered congressional map, giving Republicans 80% of seats in a state that Trump won with 53% of the vote. So listen, you can't get at more surface value, more of a surface level, an understanding of how Republicans are trying to gain minority rule within this country, okay? That is the only way that they can maintain power on especially a shifting younger demographic that is becoming more politically involved. They know that the only way that they can win elections is basically if they, do voter purges and kick people off the voting rolls and try to restrict the ability for people to vote by doing things like, voter ID and all of these other restrictive measures that they put in place, and doing shit like this and gerrymandering these maps so that they only make sense to be able to reward Republicans for this type of behavior. So, I mean, listen, you can't possibly say that this is a real justification or a real what an actual democracy would look like in a functioning democracy. It's 80% when they have 53% of the actual overall support from the people within this state. And again, this is not just happening in Georgia. It's not just happening in Ohio. It is happening literally all across the country right now. And they point this out here. So Mother Jones, Ari Berman, the same guy who wrote the book, Give Us the Ballot, The New Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America, noted Monday that the new congressional map gives Republicans in Georgia 64% of seats in a state that Biden won with 49.5%. So again, just completely at surface value, surface level, completely undemocratic political system that we have here in the United States. And so what can Democrats actually do about it? Well, they would have to do something really radical for Democrats, and that is actually try to wield the power that they have at their disposal right now. So they say calls for Senate Democrats to scrap the filibuster have mounted as the chamber's Republicans have blocked the For the People Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance on Monday even labeled the United States as a backsliding democracy. Again, I don't know how you could possibly look at the current state of the U.S. democracy and conclude that it is a democracy in any way, shape, or form. We actually had that recent Princeton study that came out a couple years ago that was basically plotting what the interests of the top 1% are legislatively versus what the interests of average Americans are legislatively. And basically what they concluded is that when the interests of average Americans and the policies that they want to pass through Congress are pitted up against the interests of the top 1% and what corporate America wants, basically, corporate America and the top 1%, they win 100% of the time. Okay, there is basically their conclusion of this study, which I'll actually link down below if you want to go and fact check me on this. But basically, the conclusion of this Princeton study into our so-called democracy is that what average Americans want has basically no actual statistical correlation between what gets passed through Congress. Okay, so in other words, what average Americans want doesn't fucking matter in our political system. All that matters is what corporate America wants and what the top 1% wants. And so I don't know how you could possibly label that as a so-called democracy. Okay, we don't have any democracy in any semblance of the word. And so that leads me to my final point. I mean, listen, we could pass a lot of these voting rights rights legislations and amendments through Congress, obviously you would have to get rid of the filibuster, which it looks like Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, there's absolutely no way in hell that they would ever actually do that. So, I mean, are they actually going to end up passing this? And if you wanted to pass it, you would have to do it like right now so that all of this actually comes into effect for the 2022 and 2024 elections. Are Democrats going to do that? No. I mean, it doesn't seem like they actually want to do that. Joe Biden would have to go out and actually take on a fight against a lot of these corporate Democrats standing in the way of getting rid of the filibuster. And Joe Biden clearly is not willing to fight for anything on his agenda, let alone fight for the right to vote. So listen, I mean, I don't know how you could possibly classify the current state of American democracy as an actual democracy. For that to be the case, you would actually have a political system that is representative of what the overwhelming majority of the American people want. But we just saw this process unfold with the Build Back Better Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure framework, where all of the most popular policies that were within these bills were completely taken out by a handful of Democrats, okay, and Republicans as well with the bipartisan infrastructure framework. But even just with corporate Democrats, they take out things like Medicare negotiating all drug prices, okay? That is something that is supported by a bipartisan group of over 90% of the country, and they still couldn't even get that passed. So I don't know how you call this a democracy when our government is completely bought and controlled by corporations. So again, listen, you could pass a lot of these things. You could pass the For the People Act. You could pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John R. Lewis Rights Voting Advancement Act. And those things would help in guaranteeing people the right to participate in this democracy. But at a more fundamental level, how much can you say that we have a democracy that people are able to participate in if our two options are a Republican Party that is entirely bought and controlled by the military-industrial complex and corporations, and a Democratic Party that is also seemingly completely bought and controlled by the military-industrial complex and corporate America, okay? We don't really have any real choice in this country if both of our parties within this two-party duopoly represent the same exact corporations and the same exact interests. And so listen, I mean, the United States is less so of a democracy and more so, three corporations in a trench coat basically. But, however you want to characterize the current state of American democracy, Democrats are not even doing the bare minimum to try to fix this system. They are not trying to get rid of corporate financing. They are not trying to get rid of the filibuster to actually pass some of these bare minimum voting rights legislation acts. They are not trying to counter Republicans in any meaningful way. And again, you have to understand the dichotomy here. Republicans in the Senate are saying we should have to get 60 votes to pass through voting rights legislation, but all of these Republican state legislatures around the country, they should be able to shove through extremely restrictive and in many cases racist and discriminatory voting laws with a simple majority in these state legislatures. So it's just a complete contradiction. It's a complete a hypocritical approach to this entire legislative process. But it seems like as of right now, Democrats are not going to do absolutely jack shit about Republicans taking over minority rule in this country, and that is inevitably what we are going to end up with. We are going to end up with Democrats getting completely obliterated in 2022 and 2024, and Republicans basically getting to maintain a firm grip with minority rule over our so-called democracy.